Evening, everyone. Welcome to another Mish-Mashing Battle Lounge with the 2MK team. Today we are back to actual Mish-Mashing. That is, if you want to find the lounge, this week you are just looking for Rune Siren. It is, as always, 3 rounds, first to 2, with character select off this week. We expect the lounge to fill up a little slower because we don't expect to see as many team members arriving at the beginning, and therefore there's definitely some chance to get in, whether you are extremely good and want to get your 10 battle lounge wins, or want to work on things and find that fighting Karine or Alex in this case is useful to you. It's hot, really hot where we are. This is a US East Coast, or rather Atlantic Rim lobby. Sometimes the connections are not as great as they could be due to the whole Atlantic Rim bit, but we're definitely expecting to have mostly good connections to everyone. If you are within that area anywhere around the edge of the Atlantic Ocean or in certain parts of Europe, feel free to join in and at least test how good the connection is, and we're not going to mind if it's a little laggy. There are people who have a lot more strain by lag than we do. We are having Mish-Mashing this week because certain team members have had more time to practice specific things, and of course, usually when we take those things back out quote-unquote into the wild, it's done against team members first so that we can not feel so terribly strained about not getting it right if it hasn't stuck yet.
Round 2.
It's also because it's hot and people are likely to be stressed by the heat regardless of anything else. And like all other things, your focus can be affected by any form of physical discomfort basically whatsoever. To the point where top players often train to deal with this in various ways. But for today, for most of us Northern Hemisphere people, this is absolutely going to be, I'm too warm and I can't think. And that's a lot of where your muscle memory comes in. But your reactions can sometimes slow a little bit, especially if you ended up at all dehydrated, which is why you constantly see top players drinking that water all the time. They're actually trying to maintain a very specific amount of hydration. It's actually really important. People have studied this a lot. Your brain slows down meaningfully as you get more and more dehydrated, like 15% up to certain points at times. It's pretty bad. And the more nervous you get, the worse this gets. But we are expecting to see very even matches this week, both because people have to control their thought processes during our bit of heat wave here, and because, as mentioned, a lot of players have had a lot of time to practice specific things using various bots and various other techniques. But this is the part where we are, of course, training against other players. So expect to see, at least at the beginning before heat and similar things start to tire him out, the wolf having better reactions on the reversal power bomb that we discussed last week as one of the things holding back his effectiveness.
Round 2.
And a couple of smaller execution things and footsies. As well as timing potentially for the choke reaction you get from Alex's flash chop. And some execution out of dashes. I believe he wasn't specifically working too heavily on the air knee smash last time, but that did get quite a bit of work in the time before that, and isn't likely to be terribly important until someone else joins the lounge anyway.
You win.
As always, you currently have Rillian on the mic. This may shift later on, but not necessarily for very long. As there's a chance I'll be joining Lounge today depending on how quickly it fills up, and who needs practice with what. But we do have the good start here of DeWolf getting to test some of that, regardless. The increase in DeWolf's damage is definitely making this sort of thing tighter, and Alex's strong options on trades means that Kanseki Dynasty has to worry a bit more as a result of it. Karine is still likely to dominate the footsies phase despite Alex's range, but has a little bit less freedom of movement.
You can't escape. I'm all warmed up. Over the limit.
We don't really have a plan for specific things to talk about this week, so it turns out to be relatively good that it is one of those win 10 Battle Lounge matches weeks. We do often get more players joining us, but you never know because again it gets kind of hot.
Let's do this.
I'll show you the divide in our class.
Round 1. Fight.
I'm ready.
Like you could use more. Round 2. Fight. Yeah. Elbow. Right here. Head. You can't escape! You lose. Round 1. Fight! Right head! Yeah! Yeah! Looks like you could use more training. Round 2. Fight! Power bomb! Elbow! Power bomb! Elbow! Ready. Yeah! Yeah! Perfect KO! You lose. Let's do this. Round 1. Fight! I got it! Elbow! Final round. Fight. Alex wins. Round one. Fight.
However, we're definitely seeing a bit more lag than usual today. Well, the reason isn't completely clear, so let's hope it clears up instead of having to worry about it.
Round two. Fight. Alex wins. It's go time. Let's do this.
Well, we're gonna see the usual shift. The world still disagrees about whether or not changing to the grid changes the lag. But there are definitely situations where it does do this, but not for the reasons that most people argue about. Obviously, there's a possibility that it does it simply because there's some slowdown on the PlayStation itself due to any number of external factors, heat, dust, whatever. I think it was concluded that moving to grid doesn't change much in terms of netcode, but you still definitely see some impact. Even if it's completely anecdotal and no one can actually explain why, it happens sometimes, and honestly the grid is not the best, or rather most interesting place to fight. But if it's all you're gonna get some days, then go for it. We will as always oppose the use of the grid in offline play, especially at tournaments. Please don't play grid at tournaments. You might not even get like a psychological advantage, because it doesn't really make us mad, just like, oh, this again. But there's definitely benefits to it in this situation. If things are already laggy enough as is, minimizing the options for reasons why it could be bad is generally okay. We're seeing the impact of All Might's familiarity with this character in the form of speed. And in order to defeat that type of speed, one normally has to build up a different sort of expectation of interactions. Kazuki Dynasty often finds issues with this because of being used to playing the Wolf, who has a generally different style and definitely a different speed when it comes to playing this character. So it's easy to come to the conclusion that, oh, I have time to do things, when she really doesn't. Usually when you find yourself facing this situation against a player who plays a character you feel familiar with but not in the way you feel familiar, your best options are, as always, backdash and V-reversal, mainly because they change the speed of the match enough for you to catch your breath, maybe. Now, you can't overuse these things because usually the reason it's happening has to do with your opponent's skill in moving your own expectations, but you can definitely understand that as your opponent gets better and has more methods to trick you through things, you can benefit more yourself from using your V-reversal to get you through situations. It also helps if you use it early, because it is often that we build up reactions for activating our V-trigger or V-cancels to get opportunities, especially since there's an optimal time to do it without getting hit for doing it. And the stronger your opponent is, the more likely they are to manage to land big damage around the time you are near full V-meter anyway. The result of this is you tend to take a lot of damage but get no meter out of it, and it limits your chances of being successful later. Characters who benefit by getting control of the middle of the screen can also be held off longer simply by using your V-reversal correctly or judiciously, really. And as you can see, often using it at least once isn't enough to prevent you from getting to your V-trigger somewhere in the round.
You lose.
That time seemed meaningfully less laggy. We'll see if it helps on this side as well. It might.
Let's do this.
The Wolf also faces the same relative speed issues, and similarly also needs to use V-reversal a lot more in this matchup, especially since V-triggers in the Alex mirror favor the player who has the better understanding of the character, almost all the time. Just a general, I feel better, I feel safer, I know what I'm doing, that level of comfort is what leads to being able to use the V-trigger effectively.
Looks like I won. All right. Round 2.
It's also more difficult to properly use meter in this matchup for a lot of reasons. But there's no specific way to get away from that. There's nothing it gains other than probably EX Power Bomb, which, while helpful, is mostly damage. As just demonstrated, not even EX Stomp is necessarily a thing that matters to you. There, for example, while unfortunately it did not work out, was almost certainly the V-reversal moment, although it's passed so quickly that I'm not even sure I could easily point out what it was. This often also comes up for players because the V-reversal is something that's easy to forget about, even in those moments where the V-trigger isn't actually helping. Meaning you end up with a resource that doesn't get used toward your benefit, and that ends up being super stressful. Simply because characters are balanced around being able to use all their tools, and in the case of characters that are specifically known as lower tier characters, you do have to be more on point with your uses of those resources.
Round 1. Fight!
Alex is also a character who we've mentioned many times has certain types of pressure that rely very heavily on being advantaged in buttons, but not necessarily being in a position to bait a V-reversal. Now, if you give your opponent a lot of options for the timing of this, if you get pressured a lot against Alex, your opponent will of course eventually set up such a bait. But just as general, slightly outside of mid-screen situations where Alex is looking to hold an advantage, it's relatively easy to deny him that option by using it, because he has so many buttons that are very plus well spaced, so he can't really be hurt for hitting them even if he decides to stop or go for something larger or crazier. But because of that, ends up unable to bait the V-reversal at that range. This is particularly strong when you are on offense against Alex, and in this case is doubly so because Alex on offense against Alex really wants to use the V-reversal, as it helps keep the opponent in a position that you can deal with.
Final round. Fight!
Oof. I'm not sure if that was a full stutter or just straight lag, but it looked complicated. Nice aerial bait.
Alex wins.
But it looks like at least using the grid today has increased the chance of things working.
Round one. Fight!
We often discuss things about the matchup between these two players because it's harder to discourage both of them. And Nakali is very good at interrupting things people want to do.
Looks like I won. Round two. Fight!
This generally means it's a bit easier for Cosmic Wolf to quote-unquote keep up, as he's not trying to keep up in the same way everyone else usually is. More so quietly looking for opportunities, and generally practiced a lot to understand where they are.
Alex wins.
That said, one can't just overwhelm All Might's ability to come in from the air. And therefore there's no easy answer.
Round one. Fight! I'm all warmed up. I got it. Head.
Having the right air approach is therefore relatively key to this matchup. Armored right through it.
Looks like I won. Round two. Fight! Right here, run, catch!
The air approach makes it harder for all sorts of things to happen. But, in the end, it does slow down something else about the way Cosmic Wolf's flow ends up working. As it allows Alex to close the space without having to worry about the escape options of the tower.
Alex wins. It's go time.
Right?
Let's do this. Round one. Fight!
I'm all warmed up.
Looks like I won. Alright. Round two. Fight!
We started a little late, but probably not so much so that we're going to change much of our usual schedule. But as noted, given the flow and who we expect to see at what times, I may be off the mic and into the lounge at some point. We've definitely had a bunch of tests about, for some reason, the connection between the station currently being used by Classic Dynasty and the one I'm aiming to use in a moment. We don't know why the connection was sometimes terrible, but it's been terrible enough that we may not see any matches between those two today. But that does allow us to do some moving around and specific things, namely, whenever we reach that point, whichever one got to there by winning, presumably, we'll probably just drop back and let the other take over. Maybe toward the end of the stream, if it's still going on, we might go ahead and check that, but for today, just note that if your turn is coming up and you see that match come up, it's not likely to actually happen.
Round two. Fight!
Of course, we're also going to have to hope that it even works in the first place, given that the weird ping reaction that we get from it would definitely limit the actual joining. But because it is fluctuation and not lockout, I expect to see something at least a little bit. As usual, which of us is on the mic is normally affected by which of us is playing, and especially in this heat, there's very little chance that someone is going to be playing and talking at the same time. It's a skill you could build, but it takes much more practice to be able to do, because you often have to know the matchup pretty well in order to play it at that level of automatic autopilot, while still bearing in mind what is required to get your opponent to the correct mental state so you can win. People who are good at keeping up. But from the looks of that, we're definitely not going to see any matches between those two today.
Let's do this.
The other connections look to all be approximately the same on both sides, i.e. connections from both of those stations to everyone else are equivalent. It's just to each other that for some reason is weird. But we definitely don't plan to risk it today.
Okay, let's rumble. Round one. Fight!
Therefore, the mic is now handed over to Kazuki Dynasty, though you don't not necessarily expect to say anything. That said, if there is any observation she has available, you're still likely to get it.
Round two. Fight! Alex wins. Round one. Fight! Final round. Fight!
Attack! Yeah!
Alex wins. Let's do this.
Okay, let's rumble.
私のクンフー見せてあげる。
Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight! Chun-Li wins. Round one. Fight!
Needs more training.
Round 2. Fight! Final round. Fight!
I'm all warmed up.
Chun-Li wins. It's go time. Let's do this. Round 1. Fight!
Right here, run!
Round 2. Fight!
I'm ready.
Chun-Li wins. Round 1. Fight! Round 2. Fight! Chun-Li wins. Let's do this. Round 1. Fight! KO! Chun-Li wins. Round 1. Fight! Round 2. Fight! Chun-Li wins. Let's do this.
Okay, let's rumble.
Round 1. Fight!
Looks like I won. All right.
Round 2. Fight!
The finale!
Final round. Fight! Chun-Li wins. Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight! Chun-Li wins. It's go time. Let's do this.
Alright, as noted, we are going to be avoiding that match and going back and forth. Hopefully this won't turn out to be too laggy on their side due to not being on grid.
Round one. Fight!
Karina and Chun-Li actually face a similar problem when it comes to facing Alex. Specifically that one of the few characters in the game with enough range even without the walk speed. And no problems in terms of health, meaning that it can afford to take more risks and go for bigger attempts at punishes that might otherwise be dangerous. While both these characters are decent, Chun-Li having slightly less damage in most situations than Karine does, at least when you're using the trigger 1, you still have to be concerned more so about the interactions in neutral with Alex than specifically about whether or not you are doing enough damage to him as a whole. Fortunately, it's a little bit easier to go for your Oki because he doesn't have a lot of things you have to worry about there.
Looks like I won. Alright.
Particularly if you are willing to do this throw versus strike consistently enough to get away with. One of the bigger problems in this matchup for Alex is deciding when to use the stand heavy kick. If the opponent chooses to come forward, it's a really good option, especially since these characters tend to get themselves into that really annoying space where they don't have an option to punish it well, but can't necessarily walk up to throw safely without getting thrown themselves. On the other side though, if they happen to choose to walk away in that moment, and their good back walk speed results in them outranging Alex, things don't go well from there. Still, as Alex says in his win quote, catching either of those characters can actually be fairly difficult. Fortunately, he does tons of damage once he does. In fact, it's very important in most iterations of this matchup not to put too much of your energy into finding uses for your meter in neutral. He doesn't really need it, except if they are playing very defensively. And most of the time Alex, unlike most characters, can walk them down because he has so much range they can't just start hitting buttons. He has enough range to hit things like sweep or his own crouch medium punch at ranges where those characters want to hit footsie buttons themselves, meaning that it's less safe to do so and they have to spend more time walking backward to avoid certain Alex options. Meaning, basically, that he is one of the few characters in the game that easily, or relatively easily, corners Kareen and Chun-Li. Having only a slightly harder time against Sakura for various reasons. From that side of the Kareen or Chun-Li player, you really have to decide how much you want to let this happen, because it depends not only on the skill of the Alex player, but what button they happen to choose to hit. They can randomly hit buttons to an extent, because waiting for Alex to hit buttons isn't necessarily guaranteed, meaning you end up in a very calm space that Alex often gets to take advantage of, or you end up hitting too many buttons of your own and therefore losing out to his. Chun-Li has two solutions to this. Both her crouch heavy punch and back heavy punch have good ways of dealing with this, and Kareen could technically manage in certain cases, but it might require her second V skill, as she doesn't have any other button that directly fits the same space and causes Alex the same type of trouble. That does work. Well played. Not enough to kill, but you really don't care too much at that point.
You lose.
It is still a difficult check/decision for Kareen though, as it depends heavily on the Alex. For some who like to stay further away and not necessarily try to walk you down, who are looking for options for whiff punishes or getting their own stomp or grab, it can be easier to keep the Mayokin. It keeps them from doing a lot of things, gets you under certain moves, and has enough range compared to most of her other moves to catch Alex in the start of things when he thinks it's a good idea, or to force him to keep blocking. If the player is aggressive and has a good concept of their spacing though, the Mayokin becomes less helpful, particularly because even without immediately trying to punish the move, Kareen must often backdash out of it or similar in order to give Alex some reason to not just powerbomb it immediately.
Round one.
Alex's ability to walk Nikali to the corner has similar effects, but it often comes up in the I am now moving forward via air movement from larger distances across the screen. This is mainly because Nikali's specific methods of clearing that distance himself or attacking from that distance himself require not only that you have a good reaction, but oftentimes honestly don't hurt Alex that much. Of the uppercut characters in the game, Nikali's Oki off, his uppercut is by most standards only reasonable. And the damage the move does when in certain spaces doesn't necessarily deter Alex players very much. This isn't to say they'll just jump randomly and try to hit jumping moves, but the ability to fake out, the ability to dive and similar can definitely mess with Nikali players, forcing them to use their crouch heavy punch a lot more in that spacing.
You can't escape.
I'm ready.
Alex wins.
Showing off the Shoryuken trophies.
Round one. Fight.
Simply put, Alex has both the superior gap closing ability and technically the superior damage. Meaning that once Nikali reaches the corner, it's a lot more about have I used my V trigger yet, which causes problems if he has a lot of the time, and similarly, how likely are you to bait my uppercut? But now we see the opposite side. It's decently effective for Nikali to get Alex to the corner, although it seems to change the range on his dash up throw enough to slightly cause some problems. This is actually related to a psychology thing though. In the end, whether or not a player is likely to dash up and throw or go for a command grab is something people think about relative to the range they were in. Basically, if you wanted to get Oki off buttons and you didn't need to dash up to do it, possibly even if you had better options if you didn't, if you walked or similar to get perfect spacing, then you dashing is at least slightly a tell for the idea that you plan to throw. And this can really affect how effective your throw game is, especially when you're not doing a real setup, when you are dashing in the hopes that maybe your opponent will attempt to throw you and you just delay your own throw and you end up teching out, or you decided that you're just going to dash up and throw because you think they're going to keep defending, because you've convinced them that defending is required due to hitting a ton of buttons before then. It can work out pretty well in that case, but watch out for those tiny tells when you have a character that doesn't have, or that does have a better way to do it from there, and then you dash up and throw, or dash up at all. Your opponent will be thinking, wait, why are you dashing? You didn't need to dash. And a lot of people can do this fairly subconsciously, so
Looks like you could use more training.
That V skill
Round 2.
has a similar effect on Alex's game plan as the fact, what we often mention, that when Seth absorbs Alex's V skill, it causes more problems. Simply that move, being able to chain out of other things, is really meaningful. Alice's stomp is often both a way around footsies and a thing that most people will not be expecting from close range for many reasons. The ability therefore to do a different move and then chain into that is a big deal.
Alex wins. Round 1.
As always, our lounge usually ends much later than the stream ends, and whether or not the stream goes on a particular amount of time mostly has to do with who's available, who we're expecting to see, and who joins that week. This week is mostly just team members, the gang, other people that we know, which means it's usually quiet when you have this sort of stream as it is today, and being quiet usually means that we end the stream a little earlier.
Looks like you could use more training.
Round 2.
Therefore, this may be the last on-stream match of the night, possibly. Mainly because the follow-up match would definitely be one in which I can't talk or give a closeout. And we're fairly far along. That said, the Wolf is going to give All Might run for his money at least a bit today, so it's definitely not going to be terribly slow. And therefore, we're hoping for an explosive finish. But Alex is good at that, so I don't have to hope all that hard, honestly. We can pretty reasonably expect that however this match ends, there will have been at least one really big flashy point during it. See? Flashiness. But is it enough, actually? Yes, it is.
Alex wins.
And that means that now we know we are going into the last on-stream match of the night. The lounge almost always stays open for a considerably longer period.
Round 1. Fight.
And almost certainly you will be looking once still for Rune Siren. 3 rounds first to 2 with characters let off. Plans for tomorrow's stream are up in the air. It is likely to continue to be this hot. But we don't have a whole lot of other obligations to fill out, so it's likely you'll get something. But if you don't, it'll probably be on our Twitter 2_MK_FTC as always. Or rather the lack thereof, because that is often the way it works out too. If you don't see anything tweeted by 710, don't expect to see much. But as always, we'll try, if we happen to know really early on that we're not going to get a stream, we'll try to let people know. Here's another one.
Looks like I won.
Final round.
We still have no content on Wednesdays as a generality at the moment. Although we may be getting back to some sandbag casuals or Heart of Battle even.
I'm ready.
And on Thursday you can join us for Dead or Alive 60 times. Friday should be, as usual, no content, and back around to Monday for another Street Fighter V Battle Lounge. But that brings us to the end of tonight's stream. Once again, 3 rounds, first to 2 character select off. And look for Rune Siren if you would like to join us. We expect to be around for another probably 45 minutes at minimum. This has been Rillian, therefore 14 2MK. Good luck with your training and good night everyone.